Welcome to another episode of Going Under, Anesthesia Answered with Dr. Brian Schmutzler. And today is a very special episode as we are in Atlanta, Georgia with some of the leadership here of CCI Anesthesia. And you've known in previous conversations we've had, Brian, that you're also on the board of CCI here as a Vice President of Medical Affairs. But today's a very special day as we have the CEO and founder of CCI, Kurt Zumwalt. Kurt, thanks so much for making time to join us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You brought some of that Orlando nice weather here.
Yeah, well, you can see that tan I have. So yeah.
That's right. But, in today's podcast, we really want to dive into what CCI is and what it does, why you founded it, and, let you guys just be open to discussion about anesthesia practices in today's real-life world. So, Brian, if you want to take it away and do a little introduction, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So Kurt and I have known each other for, probably 6-7 years now. Kurt's not only the owner of the company and my boss, but I consider him a friend and honestly a mentor. The way that Kurt does business is really the way I want to do business, and leadership development and all the kinds of stuff he does. So I thought today it'd be awesome if you came on the show and just talked just a little bit about how, your background, because I think that's important, and then how you founded CCI Anesthesia and what your vision is, not only for CCI, but for anesthesia management going forward. Because I think we talk often about how really visionary you are, right? You kind of see things before they happen, and you can talk about the MAP program a little later if you'd like as well, but just the vision you have for anesthesia management in the U.S. going forward.
Sure. So you asked about background, so I'll give you a little bit of my background. So I've been doing practice management for 40 years, started out in the emergency medicine business, running an emergency department. So, and the company I was with got swallowed up by PE company, by private equity firms. And started out 40 years ago, and it was one of the very first companies in the practice management fields from a large hospital standpoint. Most at that time it was done by a surgeon in the ER, down the ER. It could be a general practitioner, it could be a podiatrist, could be whatever was on staff. That's how they covered it. And this became more of a formal, well-trained providers. Emergency medicine was just starting to come into its own, and so it became a boarded subspecialty or specialty. And so did that for, almost 20 years. And as I watched our company get gobbled up several times, and I went, I learned a lot about what to do and what not to do, and a fair amount of what not to do. So I had a business partner when I started this, Paul Gertis, and we started this together 20 years ago, and we set it up in a certain way. We went, okay, what we learned not to do with PE companies, which is PEs are very private equity, very focused on, it's the bottom line. You got to have a bottom line, you got to make money. But what was happening is in order to fund them, they had to pay the providers lower. And so we went into this saying, no, we're going to figure out what the market is and go slightly above it because we want the best. So, there's no secret sauce to that in the fact that, okay, to get the best, you got to pay. Our trouble was, how do you take high quality physicians and CRNAs and get them out to community hospitals, some places in the middle of nowhere? And some very difficult locations.
Dodge City is
a great example. Yeah. I mean, it's a wild, wild west, and in Dodge City on the east side of town is a Cargill plant. Those that don't know the Cargill plant, it's a meat processing. So when the wind blows across the plains, wind blows east to west. So in town, it can be rather pungent. So wonderful town, wonderful people. We got a great practice area. We've been there for, I'm going to say 13, 15 years, somewhere around that. So a long time. So it's been... but that's all throughout the United States. We go from the north of the Canadian border to the west, to the southwest, to the southern part of the country in Florida and up the East Coast. So we're all over the place, I think in 19 states now. But when we started this, we decided, well, we have no desire to sell this company. That was the biggest thing we decided early on. We're not going to sell this. So it allowed us to look far in advance. All my competition is looking 5 to 7 years. That's what private equity is, about 5 to 7 years. You sell it, you make it, and move it on. And you make your money
to the bigger PE company.
Exactly.
PE company.
Yep. And it just keeps growing and growing, and their debt grows bigger and bigger because of that. And I think that's really one of the things that sets us apart, is that fact, never intended to sell it. Everybody's always asking me, what's your end game? What's your out? I'm like, I mean, when I croak, I mean, when I take the mask off my face, I mean, I don't tend to stop. So no, I'm not looking to cash out. I'm not going to cash out. And everybody's looking to cash out. Well, when you have the view that I do, which is, if I figure out what's coming up in 10 years, I'm heading towards that. Everybody else is 5 years, or I'm just looking to sell it. So I'm going to get as many contracts in as fast as possible, grow as fast as I can, and sell it, make a buku bucks. Well, I don't. What I do is I take whatever profit I have, I shove it back in the company. So I have zero debt, zero. So after 20 years, I got zero, because I just keep funneling back in and growing the company. I don't need to borrow. I have lines of credit and so forth, but it allows me to do a lot of things that nobody else does. For instance, I could have been 3 times this size if I wanted to. If I was like, I'm just going to take these on and sell it, I would have been 3 times the size I am. No, so all I do every year is I go, what can I do? How many hospitals can I bring on? How many practices? Because I also do ASCs, ambulatory surgery centers. And then I add the people. I bring people in from a business standpoint. All my business friends tell me this makes no sense. I actually recruit in advance to bring the support staff in. And then when I bring the hospitals in, the folks have been here long enough that understand the culture, that we have a very unique culture in our company, understand the culture before I send them out into the market to help and to support the practices. So very, very different than anybody that I know that's doing this.
What is the culture? What kind of culture precedents do you like to set?
We have nearly 50 hospitals today. Every one of our hospitals is a reference. That's what drives me. People say, well, what are you after? I said, that. I want everybody to be a reference for me. And so they're a reference for me, I'm doing a phenomenal job. And so to do that, I've got to have the right people. 20 years ago when I started this, we were virtual. 20 years ago, nobody was virtual.
Pre-COVID.
For
those who don't understand, that was before COVID happened.
2004, we started it, nobody, and that was the other thing. We decided, well, we got to keep in order to be, because we got to keep the cost down so we can pass the cost back
to the providers,
So it was a benefit to the providers and a benefit to the hospitals. So I'm able to keep costs down. It's less cost to the hospitals. So, that was the thinking, and we followed it every year and it shows because we just don't lose hospitals. And between the references, not losing hospitals, we're doing the right thing. But I will only take on what we can do and no more. And as you asked, the question is, what is that secret? Well, one is, because we're virtual, I'm able to find the people like Brian. At the time when Brian and I first met, I was living in Baltimore. I'm living on the other side of Disney. In a place called Celebration, Florida.
Which is really great when we go down to Disney, because we get to see Kurt when we're down to Disney.
Yep, so annual trip.
Twice a year now, I think.
Oh yeah, it's going to grow, so every quarter now.
That's right.
But the benefit of that is I'm able to find people like Brian if I said, Brian, you got to move to Orlando. Thank you, but no thank you. All right, I'll lose you.
My kids might like that, but I don't think, I'm not sure Alicia would go for Orlando.
Yeah.
And how do you? You use the virtual method to find the best of the best. Brian is regarded amongst his peers as one of the best out there.
He is great.
But how do you, who do you send out to find those people? And in the beginning, it was you and basically your partner.
You and Paul, right?
Me and Paul.
Yeah.
We started out, we did everything: sales, operations, credentialing, everything. Then we kept growing, and we added a person here and there, but early on, it was everybody I knew. So I brought in everybody that I trusted, that I liked, and that's how we first started. Then we started, well, who do you know? Who do you know? And so people typically refer the people that they want to work with, because it's their reputation on the line. So we've got some wonderful people because of that. And then it just keeps expanding. So before, it's mostly referrals. Now we kind of put it out there, and, we're not huge, so we're not, on tip of tongues of everybody out there, but we're able, once they hear about us, they're like, well, God, I've had so many people that left private equity firms that have come here or other companies outside and said, this is where I want to retire. And that makes me always feel good. This is where you want to be for life. That's great. I love it. And it's just the whole environment of we are a very much we talk about a lot of things. We banter things back and forth until we figure things out. We talk a lot. So very open environment. Everybody can talk. I like, as a CEO, I like to be challenged. I'll say something, but I want you to come back at me. Tell me, no, that's a crazy idea. But I will do the same to you. And it goes back and forth. All in good nature, all, not being mean to people and so forth. No, you got to be a good person. That's probably number one.
Yeah.
I interviewed
Honesty.
somebody the other day
Yep.
for a VP, and the first thing is I spent 1 hour on the phone just making sure you would fit within this culture. Sure. Yeah. Nothing else beyond it. I want to make sure that you did. And that's how it is. It's everybody that talks about the company says, by God, your people are great. Now I'm talking about the non-clinical. Then it does translate. Then you got to have that in order to find the clinical folks that meet that as well. And we got some wonderful. Brian has now moved up. Brian's moved all the way up, and he's in the second position, about to become the top dog, clinically in the company. And so I'm excited about it. When I first met Brian, I saw the potential with Brian. I said,
We should get to that story. Keep going.
Yeah,
We should get
I
to
want
that
you
story.
to tell that
Yeah.
story.
We'll get to it. We'll get to it. Let him finish.
You said you wanted to keep this to a certain amount of
Yeah,
time.
that's
Might go
all right.
way
That's
past
all right.
that.
Yeah.
So, but that's what has helped us grow, is that the reputation. Before, from a sales standpoint, we grew because hospitals kept telling the next hospital, and that's how we grew. And now we have more formalized, but so they need a reference, just pick one. Which one you want? Where are you from? Okay, I'll give you that hospital over there, over here. I'll give you all 40, I think we're 48, 49 now.
49, yep.
So we just keep growing.
That's organic. That's,
Yeah.
Well, and I think not only that, but and we were just on a call about this, that we want you to call the hospitals where we even have challenges, right? It's not just that you have to call, our great successes, even though there's lots of great successes. Call the hospitals where you have challenges, because it shows that we're not perfect, but we can also work through challenges with you as a team. So, and I guess from my perspective, when speaking of culture, I guess the few things that I would sum up, I would say we have a culture. It's like it feels like a family almost. So we might challenge each other. We might get frustrated with each other, but it's all in the betterment of the family, of the company. And then honesty is huge, right? I mean, that's probably the biggest thing. Like, you, Nathan, Alex, you always say we can get past anything except you lying to us, right? And that goes for the providers. Anybody in the company is, you can make a mistake. I mean, we've had our challenges in the past too.
Yes.
But as long as you're going to be honest with me,
sure,
then we can go forward and be a team.
I wish companies would follow that model,
I
and
agree.
stick to it. Because I think that's where we're finding, in the workplace now is a lack of that, and that's where when you have miscommunication within a company, that's where the chain breaks. So
how do we meet?
I'm interested in this story.
So I'll start the story from my perspective. So I was at we've talked before at sort of a bigger hospital at the time, looking to kind of transition out. I knew it wasn't going well there, and I actually applied for a job with CCI at I think it was LaGrange, maybe somewhere in northern Indiana, right?
Yes, it was one of
And so I wasn't super interested in the job, but it seemed good. And so I met Nathan at the time, and I said to him, I was like, I'm not sure this job's the right fit, but what if we work together on another project? And so after that, you came along with Alex as well, and we all got to meet each other. And I think it was from my perspective, it was pretty obvious from the beginning that we had aligned goals. And so maybe your perspective on that as well.
No, absolutely. We first met because at the restaurant.
That's right. Yep.
And that's where we, it's like, okay, here we are. Let's.
Yeah.
We're talking about a new this ASC, and we were just getting to know each other. So I was very much impressed with Brian's ability. Talk about honesty. Brian's got it. I mean, it's really, those things are very important in this organization, and Brian just fit perfect. And so as time went on, I was going, okay. At one point, eventually, as the years went by, we started to practice and so forth. I'm like, Brian, you're going to go all the way up in this organization. I don't know if you remember that.
I do. I remember. Yeah.
And it was because I could see all that he was doing and all he was capable. And as young as he was, I'm like, holy moke, there's not many you get that way, that young, that can make those leaps. And he was making leaps and bounds in his abilities and his management style and so forth. And so impressed everybody in the organization. And so, and it was like, okay, now it's time, bring you on here, because he was mostly clinical, then regional, and it was like, okay, now you need to come on board more full time. And it's just been tremendous for the company.
So, Brian, talk a little bit about what your role is within the company
Sure.
and what exactly you do.
Yeah, so I'm Vice President of Medical Affairs, and so as Kurt mentioned, I'm sort of second in command, if you would say, in terms of the clinical end of the company. So my boss is Chuck Trenum. He's not coming. He called you, right?
Yeah, he did.
Not
Yes,
coming this
yes.
weekend,
Yeah.
or this week. But and so Chuck's been a great mentor too. He's the executive vice president of medical affairs. And usually when we go into a practice, the way I describe it is, Chuck and I kind of handle the entirety of the clinical issues within the company. We're clinicians. I'm still practicing. Chuck practiced till probably about 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago. So if there's a clinical issue at a site, I mean, I've gotten, you've been with me all day, 5, 6, 7 text messages from sites saying such and such happened, we had a code, all that kind of stuff. So we go in and we really talk about, okay, this is what you need to do clinically. How do we help you clinically? And then we help the leadership at each site run their site. So there's chiefs at each site, and those chiefs then report to what's called a regional medical officer or regional clinical officer, depending on whether it's a CRNA or an anesthesiologist. And the next episode, we'll talk about that.
We will.
And then those people report to myself and Chuck, as well as Bronson, who's the vice president of clinical affairs. And so any clinical issue that comes up, we handle that. We have a whole leadership division. We have a leadership conference every year. People can come and learn how to lead a practice, because I think your philosophy, Kurt, and mine clinically is that each practice is its own individual practice, and that we as CCI are there to support you from a clinical end and from a business end, but we're not there to run your practice, right? It's a local practice. We're just there to help you make it successful. And so that's sort of my role. And then I do a lot of other things within the company. I do some business development, certainly do some of the ERAS and the clinical implementation. And so I kind of do a wide array of things. But if you would say, what do you do specifically in your role as Vice President of Medical Affairs? It's really just to support our clinical practices.
Kurt, this is an interesting question, and I'm just going to go here right now because Brian and I have talked about this on multiple occasions. But I want to ask you, as somebody who's seen it, up close and personal for the last 20 years, how has the world of anesthesia changed in the last 20 years? And where is it going in the next 10 to 20 years, which we have discussed? But I would love to hear your answer on that.
Good question. Very good question. When I started 20 years ago, CRNAs were coming into their own. And, we started out we decided when we started the practice or the company that we would focus on community hospitals. So staying away from urban, suburban. Everybody can do that because it's not that hard to recruit because it's around a city.
Yeah. Everybody wants to be in New York City and Chicago and Austin, Texas, and all these places.
Drag them out to the more challenging places. Two things. One, you got to get good quality, because when they're out there, you're on your own. So either as a doc or a CRNA, either one, you're on your own. So if something goes or amiss, good luck to you. Right. It is tough. So you got to get the higher quality, the strong ones that want to do it, are good at it. At one point in the company, I haven't looked at the numbers of late, but at one point, over 50% of our providers were military. So they were either reservists or retired. Why? Because these folks traveled or practiced either in Afghanistan, Iraq, on an aircraft carrier. One of them was in the middle of the invasion of Panama. There's some interesting stories, but it's like they're good. They know what they're doing, and they're comfortable being by themselves, because that's how it is in the military. You're out there, period. And so that's what we recruited. So we got them out there, did a phenomenal job, and we decided, okay, well, now we're going to try to expand this. And so we started getting in bigger and bigger and bigger places because of that. But the quality of the providers is always number one. Number one is that. then you kind of build from that. Because Brian's clinical. I'm not clinical. I know enough to be dangerous, but that's it.
He's an honorary anesthesia provider.
Yeah.
Honorary.
I stayed
Emeritus, right?
If you remember the old ads from Holiday Inn Express, I stayed at Holiday Inn Express last night. So
I don't know how much of a Gen Z crowd we have, but they won't remember that at all.
Yeah. I'll refer back to a lot of old stuff.
Yeah.
But so going from that day where it was just growing, it was fascinating when we started the company. We did things differently in terms of how we staffed. And from my former business partner brought that to the table, fascinating ideas of how can you get, because in anesthesia you need a provider, a doc or a CRNA at the head of the table. So
all the time, 24/7, 365, right? Yeah.
So how do you maximize that when, you got to have somebody at the table? Well, we figured out how to do that. We figured out how to get people to come to these remote places and stay rather than having churn. Okay, they're there for a year and gone. At one point, pre-COVID, we had as low as a 2% turnover. That's unbelievable.
What is the average, turnover in a smaller city like this?
It's hard to tell. Pre-COVID, and correct me if I'm wrong, you may know this better than me, it was closer to 20%, 25%.
Yep.
I think 1 in 4.
Yeah. Now, post-COVID, it's got to be 50% probably,
it's
right?
unreal.
Yeah, I mean, it's
unreal.
Yeah, and we can talk about the whole challenges with staffing at this point, too, at some point, but yeah.
Yeah, so gone from early on, having actually, I can't say arguments, but some interesting discussions with CEOs telling them, okay, we're going to staff it this way. And they come back, you can't do it that way. Yeah, I can. No, you can't. Yeah, I can. Yes, we can make it work, and it will work. And some of them wouldn't believe me, and so we didn't do business together. Actually, one hospital CEO, who's a reference for me, by the way, that he convinced, he said, you're not going to be able to do it. And then, okay, we didn't get the business. A month later, I see an ad for my model from him. Yeah. So I called him up and I said, what's going on here? And he goes, well, I tried it and it didn't work. I said, you tried it and it didn't work because you didn't know what you're doing. That's the key. You didn't know how to pull it together and how to support it. I do. And in the meantime, he got bought by a academic center, and that was, I wouldn't be able to get in there anyhow. So he said, I'll be a reference for you because you guys were right. You did a great job. So I thought that said a lot because I didn't do a business with you.
Didn't even get the contract.
And gave me a reference.
Yeah.
Going to pre-COVID, that kind of continued on, and more, we've got practices. We have a wide variety of practices. We have no practices that are all doc. That's kind of something that was early on and then slowly has transitioned because of the cost. And then things have changed dramatically as it relates to those costs. But from docs to team model, which is you'd have the docs, anesthesiologists supervising the CRNAs. And so that has worked. And then more CRNAs, less and less docs. And there are fewer and fewer docs being trained and out there. So you got to use the resource you have.
And a lot retiring. That was
That
was a huge push. And we talked about. I think we talked about.
We did talk about it in a previous podcast.
You've got even people in their late 40s, early 50s, not even the boomer generation, who are retiring or getting out of anesthesia. So. Why is that? COVID was a big thing. A lot of people. I was not in an acute care hospital during COVID, so I didn't see it the way that a lot of anesthesia providers saw it. But it scared a lot of people out of the business. They went back and retrained in something else, chronic pain, or they went into some other area of medicine besides anesthesia.
But on top of that, you had the PE world really started years before that, but it was going. A number of years, these firms came in and started buying practices. Mm-hmm. Well, the doctors made their
millions,
money.
Yeah,
a lot of money.
Yeah.
So they're able to retire at a younger age.
Yeah. Say, okay, I'm out of here. Yeah. See you later. And then those groups, the PE companies, would then backfill them with CRNAs. Mm-hmm. And there was, at one point, I want to say glut, but there was a lot of CRNAs out there. So the compensation for the docs while going up to this, the CRNAs were much slower. Mm-hmm. Then COVID hit. And it changed everything.
How did it change for you specifically?
Well, actually, compared...
Or has it?
It has changed. It has changed, but not to the extent as my competition has. Financially, we were fine because the way it was set up. I didn't have the debt. Those private equity firms, they had a lot of debt, and one is in bankruptcy trying to get out. One just went belly up, left. The others are in financial distress, and most of them are financial distress. I'll leave it there because I don't want anybody coming after me. But yes, many of them are struggling, and during all that time, they kept being bought, and during COVID, they had to shut down the ORs. Right. They shut down. You couldn't do surgeries, or you had a very minimal amount of surgery that was being done. All electives were canceled and whatnot.
And that's where all the money is, right? So if you think about it, and we've talked a little bit about the business of anesthesia, but the money comes from those elective cases primarily, not the cases that are emergencies or traumas or that sort of stuff. So you're talking about turning off the spigot of 70-80% of the revenue. So.
And this is what funds the hospital. The one department you can guarantee in a hospital that makes money is the OR. And so now you just cut that off. And then you have all these hospitals that, or all the groups that are employing, well, you've got to pay them. How do you do it? Well, I was set up in such a way that I could retain everybody, keep things going, or redeploy them to other areas of the hospital, like up in the ICU, which was critical because of COVID. So we were able to move things around and not have to let folks go or put them in furlough. So we were very unique at that time. And so a lot of companies did get bought by other companies because they were struggling. I'm not looking to buy anybody. I'm just looking to have a slow, continual growth. As I said, I have a saying, I don't want to be the largest. I want to be the best. So that's what drives me. And as I said about the references, because one hospital CEO, I went in after a year. I was going a year after we started, and I sat down with the administrative team, the C-suite, and said, did I do what I told you I'd do? And everyone, the answer is yes. And that's what I want to hear anyhow, but yes. And the CEO had to leave earlier in the meeting. He says, I got another meeting to go to. He says, but how did you do that? I said, how did I do what? I'm sorry, I didn't understand. How to do what? And he goes, 2-3 years previous to you, we had nothing but churn. Providers coming in and out. We couldn't hold anybody. You came in here in 9 months, had us fully staffed, and just changed the whole structure of the department and so forth. How'd you do it? And I said, well, as I shared earlier, I said, I recruit in advance and take on what I can. So the hospital just before you, I finished, and then when I took you on, I just took all my resources and turned them on you. And I got it done. And I said, that's how I do it. So all these other companies, they're looking to add. They need to add hospitals. They want to grow fast. Got to grow fast because they want to sell. And that's how you sell. I mean, that's how they sell. Any company. It may be anesthesia, may be any other company out there. That's how you do it. You grow as fast as you can, and you find somebody to buy you. And not looking at that, so it never crosses my mind. But, and then I turn to the next one. And then I keep recruiting internally the support staff to support them. And then but critical to me is I want our staff to understand that culture that we have. So when I'm able to let them go out in the field, they know what we do, how we do it, and how we act. I always get kudos to our support staff from not only the hospitals, but from our providers, saying, you got great people. And, when you think about it is, I have you working at a community hospital. Well, I need you to be a team. I need you to want to be there and feel like a team. Well, they are, and that's my greatest challenge. That is right now with COVID and post-COVID is the challenge to make sure everybody feels as they did before as part of a team and feel like you are valued, respected, and valued for what you do. We're paying a lot of money. I mean, the cost of the providers have gone up, especially CRNAs, dramatically.
We've talked about this quite a bit.
Yeah, and dramatic. And I look at it and go, my number one goal first is retain. I want to retain. And what's important, I think, is, yes, they make a lot of money, but people don't leave, in my opinion, people don't leave for money. They leave because they're unhappy. Right. So what do I need to be doing to make sure that I'm satisfying their needs, that our providers are heard, and that they are represented well, and they know we're there to support and help them when issues, because there's, it's the OR.
Right.
There's always a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it hard?
No, go ahead.
Is it harder and harder? Well, this is a full circle question, I guess. Then, is it harder and harder to find unicorns
Yeah.
like Brian then? And find that perfect fit. Is it harder and harder to do that post-COVID world?
It's hard, but you're right. This is the unicorn. Someone said the other day, we need another Brian. I said, listen, I've been doing this for 40 years.
And there's been one Brian.
There's one Brian. Now there's another Brian, but it's a CRNA Brian.
Yeah.
And our chief, Chuck Trinham, is tremendous. Chuck's been with me day one.
Yep.
Day one. And he's just tremendous. Yeah. And so, as a mentor for Brian and Chuck and I, and my former business partner, Paul, we're like threesome. We just always were together, always talking, always figuring this thing out as we went along. So it's, that's critical, but Brian is a unicorn. It's plain simple. So I'd love to have more of them. Ain't gonna find them. That's okay. If I can find somebody near him, that would be great. And I do have, when you look around the company, I am very, very lucky. The people that we got, our providers, absolutely outstanding. I mean, I've got folks that I could tell you, I go on for hours. I've got chiefs, our chief docs, our full-time staff docs, and chief CRNAs and staff CRNAs, just tremendous. Because number one is, how good are you clinically? And then after that is your personality. And so I don't, because when you look at me compared to a lot of other groups, not all, because there are some very good groups out there, is that if I get great quality providers, about 80% of my problems are over because I don't have any clinical problems. Now it's interpersonal, it's really management, and that's what we do. And we're very good at that. So it's a lot of years' experience to be able to manage the practice as well.
I think there's some generational issues currently too. I think that's probably the biggest issue. And I'm even now I sound like the old guy, but not as old as you though.
I see a little gray hair, so that's good.
So I think
Did you see that remark? Not as old as you. No, I think we've been doing this podcast too long.
Exactly. So I think there's some generational issues, particularly Gen Z. They want different things than, I consider myself Gen X, maybe millennial, depends what you look at, but Xennial, yeah, right. I don't claim millennial though. It's all about what you claim. I claim Gen X. No, so I mean, I think there's some generational issues as well. So we're figuring out, I think, as a company. I'm certainly figuring out personally, how do I interact with people that are in that generation with some of the there's some lack of loyalty, which is no judgment on that, but there's some lack of loyalty in Gen Z. There's some unrealistic perhaps expectations in Gen Z, and so I think those are things that we're trying to deal with as well as a company and personally. So,
and I think we were far ahead of the curve 20 years ago, and that's why we were able to get and retain, and that's what we're going to be doing now. Actually, we have meetings set up that we're going to figure out what's the next thing. What are we going to do differently than everybody else? I love it because I always say what we do today is not what we're going to do tomorrow. So always be innovating, always look at it differently. Is there something else we should be considering to do? And that's what we want to do, because it is, Brian's absolutely right. It's a different world, obviously, but even more so with the providers and what they're expecting and so forth. Well, how can I meet their needs and still meet the hospital's needs and still keep costs down? Because eventually you get too high and the market will dramatically change. And, with artificial intelligence, that's another whole thing you guys could probably talk about. Where's it going? I don't know. I don't know. But it is whatever happens, as you look from a business standpoint, when things get too expensive in whatever field it may be, whatever industry it is, there'll be an alternative.
Yeah, we were talking about this at lunch today.
That's right.
Yeah. So, something's going to happen probably. I've got one other question before we close out for you, Kurt. And so this is more my personal question for you, and I'd never asked you this question. So take it for what it's worth. What gave you the impetus and the confidence to start the company 20 years ago?
I go back further in my background. When I was in college, even though I ended up in business, my major was early childhood elementary education. So I went to a college, went to a junior college for years because I could afford it. And once I got my AA degree, I went on to a 4-year college to finish it off. And as a way to make money, because my father's a Marine, so I did not go in the Corps. So I had to put myself through. And so what I did was I worked as a waiter, but I owned a whole bunch of hot dog stands. And so my, ended up being chairman of the department, but my advisor was like, you need to go into business. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is how I make money. I got to pay for my school. Even though school was real cheap back then. I looked at what I was paying. I was like, holy crap.
Comparatively, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it just shows you how old I am, because it was $450 a semester for the credit, full-time credit hours. That is, yeah. And you could afford it back then. Now it's absolutely ridiculous.
Crazy, yeah.
Nutty. And so she forced me out of the program and told me, if you, so this is more than 40 years ago. So if you don't like it, come back, because it's my teaching year. She says, and I said, but I just extended my school for another semester. She says, no, I'll give you full credit. Huh? Yeah. I can say this now because it's a long time ago.
Right, exactly.
And I said, how can you do that? She says, I'm chairman of the department. I go, it's like,
Probably
throw up any red
tenured.
flags,
Yeah,
right?
probably tenured too.
Yeah,
Right.
that'd be a little problem today. But so my biggest regret is I never went back to thank her, because I got into business and I stuck with it. And so so I happen to have a relative that every once in a while would say, so when are you going to start the business? He was an influencer. He was just never pushed me, but just kept sticking it in my ear. Kurt, you can do this. I said, well, bud, it's different running hot dog stands at $1.60 a Polish hot dog versus millions of dollars. It's the same principles, absolutely. So I was like, oh. So I did it, unfortunately, 1 year after he passed away. And what pushed me to do it is I kept looking at the company I was with, and I going, I don't like what they're doing. One, they're growing leaps and bounds. I don't know anybody, and I don't like what they're doing. I never did appreciate how they did it, because it was always on the back of the providers. They took the money from the providers, kept the cost or the comp down. By doing that, you got some good folks, because just that would naturally happen, but if you're not paying the best, you're not going to always get the best. So they always had problems, clinical and a lot of other issue problems. And I thought, well, if I did this, I would just get the best, and I'll bet you most of my problems go away. It did. It's exactly what did. And what pushed me into it was, I'm done. I just couldn't stand it anymore. And I'm like, only way I'm going to be happy is I could do it myself. So I decided, Paul and I, it was a very dear friend of mine that I known him for a long time, and we're like, let's do it. Let's just make it happen. So we slowly built it, and then it was big enough. He went in full time, I went part time, because I burned the candle at working for that company while doing this until it was enough just to get me over the edge. And then I moved into full time and just focused on it. And as my children would tell you, that father just worked all the time, and I did, because I had to succeed. I refused to fail at it. But it was the desire I always wanted to. I used to own a company, though, 10 hot dog stands, what's that size versus, the amount of hospitals we have. But it was just that desire. And it is hard, let me tell you, making that leap and going, I was 46 years old, 20 years ago, so 46 years old, so you now know how old I am. And I had children. I had 4 children. So young, very young, and make that leap was a really hard thing to do, but it was worth it. And I stuck to my principles all the way through, as I've shared with you what I thought and how I wanted to do it. And my challenge is to make sure I continue that, and it continues beyond me. This is a family business. This is all my children
As you
work
can see
here.
on the website.
That's right.
There's a couple of Zumwalts.
Yeah. and they asked to come in. I didn't go out and recruit them. They wanted to come in. So that says a lot. I'm real happy about that. And they've proven themselves. This is not, what's that word I'm thinking?
Nepotism?
Nepotism,
Yeah.
thank you. It's not nepotism. They have to carry their own weight, and they all do a phenomenal job. But the way I've got it set up is it will pass down to my youngest son, is actually the one who is well positioned. I mean, he's good. So he'll keep this going. But that gives you a totally different view, because every other company I see, either if it's long-term, they're private equity. That means they've had lots of owners, lots of people running it. Well, it's very different when it's family, and you're just going to do the right thing every time. And I think that's why we're so good. And I'm lucky because I get to work with people like Brian, Dr. Trenum, Alex is our president, and I can just go on, and many of the docs out there. I have great stories. One of my docs is just share real quick. Is a Marine. I didn't know you could be a anesthesiologist Marine. And when he told me, I'm like, what? My father's a Marine. I didn't know you. I thought that's Navy. Yeah, it is, but I'm a Marine. I'm like, holy bejesus. And he has great stories because he's a fighter pilot. And he bombed Libya. I think it was the first Iraqi. He was called up for that. So, so just some great stories. I'm sorry, I love military history and so forth. And he's phenomenal. We have one of our chiefs is academic side of it. Everybody has their specialty that they're really good on, and I could go on because I would, because I know I can talk a lot. But it is I'm very proud of the people I'm able to work with.
Well, and he's an example who just exudes what standard you've set.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we see it on a daily basis because we're around him. It seems all the time, more than he likes, more than he wants us to be.
Right, exactly.
Right. But it's inspiring to hear that, even on my own side, when you're least prepared or when you're most worried about jumping, that's when you jump. And that goes for any profession, not just anesthesia, not just for your company, but for anybody who is thinking about, is this the right time? And if you're asking, is it the right time? Well, it may be past the right time.
Yes.
So, Kurt, thank you so much for joining us here and allowing us to come in and crash your meetings.
Yeah, exactly.
In Atlanta, Georgia. Gave us an excuse to come to Atlanta. And let's do it again. Please come on our podcast again. We would love that.
Should we do a few questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right. We end our show, so Kurt's new on the show, but we end our shows with some questions we get on social media. Usually they're,
they're
realistic,
we're gonna keep
and
it really harmless. This
Okay,
time,
all right,
and non-controversial.
Yeah. Sometimes we answer controversial stuff. So
we had somebody reach out on social media, and this is kind of how he gets his questions on social media.
Yep.
Somebody reached out and said in response to our last podcast, "I'm nervous about anesthesia."
Uh-huh.
How do I not be nervous about anesthesia?
well, this is the same answer I've given before, which is we have drugs for that, right? As soon as you come,
that's what they're scared of, right?
I guess what I tell people, we're highly trained. Anesthesia is very safe, much safer than it was even 30 years ago. So you shouldn't be super nervous about it, but if you are, talk to your anesthesia provider. We have, like I said, we have great drugs that we can calm you down even before you have surgery. But just know that we do this a lot. I know for you as a patient, you're coming in, this isn't normal for you, but for us, we do 20, 30, 50, 100 procedures a day. For us, this is normal, and you'll be fine.
We had somebody concerned. Kurt, we had a very spirited, I'll call it a spirited discussion online about CRNAs and anesthesiologists and AAs and the mix of all. Mm-hmm. I'm going to shorten this. How do you, as, somebody who is in the clinic all the time and working with patients and working with staff, how do you manage folks who have trouble working with the CRNAs or AAs? How does everybody get along?
That's a great question. So I guess what I try to do is I try to make everybody understand that there's a place for everyone, right? Just because somebody's a CRNA or an anesthesiologist or an AA, whatever the case may be, that everybody's highly qualified. We all go in, we do our job, we go home. We're not putting anybody in a position that they shouldn't be in. And so it's not always easy. But the other thing that I tell people is I have met excellent anesthesiologists, and I have met anesthesiologists that I wouldn't allow to put to sleep my dog. I've met excellent CRNAs, and I've met CRNAs that I wouldn't allow to touch me either, right? So for me, it's not about the initials after the name. It's about, number one, your clinical ability, and number two, your bedside manner and personality and that sort of stuff. So I don't have a great answer for that because it's not always easy. there is some tension, and we'll talk about this on our next podcast, but there is some tension between particularly CRNAs and anesthesiologists. I don't have that. I respect people for what they do and who they are, and not the letters behind their name. So
Well, I'm sure that's why Kurt hired you and brought you onto the team. So, Kurt, thank you so much.
My
It's been a
pleasure.
pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Please come on again, because we want to hear some more of those military
That's
stories
right.
and some of those stories.
yeah,
So,
yeah, and your time on the road and starting the company and stuff. We should dive into that next time.
absolutely.
For sure.
Well, check them out on CCIAnesthesia.com if you want to read more about Kurt and his team as well at CCIAnesthesia.com. And of course, this has been Going Under, Anesthesia Answered with Dr. Brian Schmutzler. I'm Vahid Sadrzadeh. We'll see you next time.